Welcome to this episode of Bibbidi Bobbidi Murder. I'm your host, Debbie, and I'm here with my co host.
Hey everyone, I am Amy.
And today's episode is going to be in our series called The American Dream Maybe It's Murder. This episode will be in the state of Alaska. So if you're ready, let's talk murder.
I've always wanted to move to Alaska, and I feel like you're about to ruin that for me.
The more I learned about this case, hurt me more than if it was my own family. So sad case. All right. Well, this case starts off in Craig, Alaska, which is a tiny southeast Alaskan village with a population of about 600 people. So, super tiny town, as most towns in Alaska, because no one lives there. The tiny village is about 220 miles south of Juneau, and it is mostly known for the fishing industry, and it was very popular among many fishermen due to its location. So it's very central to the people coming from the Pacific Northwest going to Alaska and back. The investor is the fishing boat that we're going to talk about, and it's a 58-foot high-tech boat, and it is one of the most expensive boats of its kind in this region. So it's a very well-known boat. Um, the owners and everyone are very well known just because this boat is so large, so high tech. So just remember that throughout this. It costed roughly around 850,000, which was in 1980. So that is quite a bit of money in today's society, let alone at that time. And so it's owned by the Coulthurst family, and that's kind of where we're going to start. The Coulthurst family is consisted of Mark, Irene, Kimberly, and John. Mark is 28 years old. He's the skipper, and he had not owned this boat very long. So people described him as smart, hardworking, and he was super invested in himself and his family. And his wife Irene was pregnant with their third child. So she wasn't very far along. She was about 3 months, I think, is what they said. So still just she's just 28 years old. Now, Kimberly and John are their two small children. Kimberly is 5 and John is 4. And then also on the boat there's 4 deckhands. These men, they're kind of experienced in fishing, but this wasn't their career choice. Like this isn't where they wanted to spend the rest of their life. They were just trying to work their way through college for most of them, and it was just a job that led into other jobs. Chris Heyman was the first one. He's 18. Jerome Keon, he is 18, or he's 19 at the time, and he is the newest member of the crew. He's a college student, and he was known by Mike Stewart, who is Mark's cousin. Um, and then the fourth one is going to be Dean Moon. He's also 19, and he had just graduated high school, and he was a big like football star at the time. The day that everything kind of goes down is going to be September 5th, 1982. The week before, the investor had a haul of about 77,000 pounds of salmon they had went in town to offload. So this is kind of a weird time. The salmon season is kind of like going in and out. Like it's the last week of salmon season. So business arrangements were unusual to say the least. The game and fish department had temporarily halted fishing season payouts. So as a result, the crew and the family had to kill time in Craig for a couple of days, and they were expecting around $30,000 for this haul.
That's a pretty good amount of money.
Yeah, so it's a very big industry, and where their boat was so big, they kind of brought in a lot of money with these hauls, but this would last them the whole year. So quite a bit of money, though. Um, so Mark pilots the investor into port, tying it off next to a ship called the Defiant and a second ship called the Decade. There were few spaces due to about 150 fishing boats in town, for the end of the season. Once tied, the family and the crew walk across the deck to the other two boats to reach the dock. Jerome and Dean went ashore together. They needed to make a few calls and decided to have a drink or two in town. And then the idea was that they were going to go back to a restaurant for Mark's 28th birthday. Um, the movement of Mike and Chris, however, that night are still kind of unknown. There are like some suspicions, but most likely the two just went into town for a drink and a bite to eat because it had been a long week. So, the family had decided to meet at Ruth Ann's, which is one of the very few restaurants in the town. And then they meet there around 9 o'clock, and by 10 o'clock, they're back on their ship. The Decade, which was the ship, as I said, that was parked next to them, was having a party that night. So it was kind of a loud party. And the only time they seen anyone was when John, the little boy, had stuck his head in just to say goodnight because he's a 4-year-old and that's what they do. And it is just like that's what I mean, I don't even know how to explain that, but that broke me in a portion, like, of my heart because 'cause I'm like, he's just a typical child.
He's just a cute little kid. He's just like saying hi
Yeah,
to people around and, living his life.
yeah. So that is the last time anybody on the Investor is seen alive.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
yeah, I told you it was about to break your heart.
Okay.
So, on September 6, 1982, at 6:30 a.m., one of the Decade's crewmen observed the Investor drifting away. He saw a man in the pilot house in the wheel, so the man just waves back, and he automatically assumed that this was Mark because, um,
It's
who else would
it's
it be?
Mark's boat, so who else would it be?
Yeah. So he kind of like later on says that this was kind of weird because the motor wasn't running. Like I said, this is a big boat and this is just it's just drifting off, like and it's a lot of investigators say this was like not to draw attention to it, but I wouldn't that draw more attention to it because I feel like you're just drifting out to sea. Like I feel like I'd be like, hey, what are you doing?
Like, are
But
you okay out there? Like, do you need help? Like,
is your boat not starting? But that's not the case in this situation. Um, they would find the tie downs for the vessel on the deck of the Decade, which is very unusual because these are they're expensive tie downs, and a lot of the time ship members would reuse these tie downs until they just couldn't anymore. Not many experienced shipmen would in fact leave tie downs behind. Um, So that's at 6:30, and then 15 minutes later, the captain of the Decade notices the ship's kind of receding, and he sees a man on the deck. And he describes him as a stocky with light brown hair, and he's wearing a red and black plaid jacket. And nothing more, just kind of weird, like once again, that he's just like out there doing his thing and like he's like he only sees that one man when there's a lot of people on board, but it's Alaska, you know, he's there everybody minds their own business pretty much. So at 7:30, another member of the Decade crew observes the Investor nearing Fish Egg Island. They would spot the boat out there, and this I like put it on our map. It's not very far. Like it's with an eye shot, and this is such a big ship that it's noticeable. But you can't really see a lot of details of what's happening on the ship. And then later that day, the investor skiff, which if you're not familiar with what a skiff is the smaller boat that like a lot of bigger ships will use to travel from like their ship to land, just because you can't get too close with your big ship without it dragging and causing damage to the ship. So they use smaller ones to go back and forth between the boat and land. They would spot the skiff in the water near the main dock off of Craig. So the big boat is at Fish Egg Island, which is about a mile away, and then the smaller skiff is spotted near Craig. So many had just assumed that members had forgotten something and just ran back for a um, quick grab and were headed back out. That day, a heavy fog rolls in, and this is Alaska, may I add, and it's in the ocean. So it's very heavy fog. Like you can barely see in front of you, let alone what's going on a mile away. So this heavy fog rolls in, and no one paid much attention to the anchored investor due to the hustle and bustle of the final days of salmon season. So all of everybody's attention is on this. Like there it's soon forgotten that this ship is docked randomly in a weird place. Um, it was kind of later learned that Irene was actually supposed to fly out on this day with the two small children due to getting Kimberly ready for kindergarten, and she also had a doctor's appointment for the baby. So it's the next day. Most boats began to leave out of town due to the ending of fishing season, and this was the last day of it. So any major fishermen were going to try to get as much fishing in as they can so they can come in and sell these fish back because this is their income. This is their livelihood. They're not going to miss this day. A mile from the dock, people on shore could see the investor still docked at Fish Egg Island, and this began to look really suspicious. Though there were some salmon in the cold waters near the Fish Egg Islands, it wasn't fishing and it was anchored there overnight, which is weird, especially considering they have two small children on board. Like, they're not gonna dock off there. Um, that same day, a young man was seen purchasing 2.5 gallons of gasoline in town and then the investor's skiff.
That's
So,
suspicious.
very suspicious. And this is the day it all kinds of goes down. A troller, which is just a smaller fishing boat named the Casino, is the first person to notice the fire. It is where it's a smaller fishing boat is able to navigate the water, so it first headed out. It's noticed that the monster is engulfed in black smoke. It's gone up in flames, and they alerted authorities in Craig, and then they went out there to help because, like I said, this is a small fishing town, 600 people. Everyone helps everyone when they can. So they rode out to the island to see if they could help. As the casino raced to the island, there's a man in the investor's skiff passes them going to reach the dock, and they just assumed that this man was going to get help, and he he stops and he actually talks to these men, and he doesn't really say much to him, but he just leads them to believe that he's going to go get help. So they describe him as young, wearing a baseball cap, and later described as having a pockmarked face, kind of scarred, like with a lot of like acne scarring and stuff. That later on, the investor's skiff will be found tied to the dock, undamaged and abandoned. The man has slipped away without being noticed due to all of the chaos of the fire. So as the casino reaches the investor, they don't have a lot of firefighting equipment, and though they were soon joined by the state troopers of Alaska, the fire continued until the next day, when finally the Coast Guard would arrive with two water pumps. As the fire is kind of burning, they put it out for a brief time, and they were able to pull four bodies from the ship. Those four bodies would later be identified as Mark, Irene, Kimberly, and Mike. Um, Once they're removing these bodies, though, the fire breaks out again, and they have to fight that. So, kind of where they have to get off the ship, and they weren't able to. They don't even know who's on the ship, let alone able to search it because of the fire. So they finally put out the fire for good, and the deck cools, and they examine the boat and realize it's been arson. That this boat has been set on fire. That it started in a weird location towards the back of the boat, not where the engines or whoever had set the fire had first attempted to sink the ship because he had opened all of the sea caulks, which kind of keep water out, and They think that he was trying to let the boat sink first in the cover of the heavy fog, but realized, like, "Oh, this didn't work," so that's when they decided to set the fire.
I will say
So,
this man had multiple plans.
yeah, it's definitely wasn't just like a, "Oh, oops,
It
accidentally
was
kill people."
yeah, it was not a random thing at all. Like he like had backup plans to his original plan.
Yeah. So as the investigators are kind of sifting through the remains, they found just an awful scene. Um, they theorized that everyone had died the night on September 6th or early in the morning of the 7th. Irene was found in the same clothes she wore to the restaurant. So, and this is where things get kind of crazy. So they're towing the crime scene back to Craig to do an investigation. The ship sinks 6 miles from Craig. So all of the evidence is gone. And so they have nothing. All they have are the eyewitness accounts. And now if you remember, there should be a lot of those because they are they see the man leaving the ship. They see a man on the skiff buying gasoline. They see a man drifting off in the early morning. And yet all of the descriptions of the man are young white male. And it's Craig, Alaska in the middle of fishing season. And so all all the people that are strange to it are young white male on fishing vessels. Like they have nothing. But so let's kind of talk about the evidence that they do have. So the evidence that they do have is a 22 Ruger rifle. Investigators theorized that this was the murder weapon. However, the bullet fragments were so damaged they could not conclusively state it was the case. The cause of death was only confirmed in 2 of the 5 confirmed murders. Um, this is kind of where it gets really sad because they didn't find everyone. They know they assume all 8 people were on the boat, but there was only 5 people found. So, um, Irene and Mark were definitely shot and killed, and they believe they were killed first. So Kimberly and Mike were identified through their remains because they were found first. So the fire hadn't really had time to damage their bodies. And then Jerome Keon was identified through the remains pulled from the fire from a jawbone that was found. He would be the last of the victims to be identified. John Colthurst was only 4 at the time and small in stature. He was thought to be at the epicenter of the fire, causing his remains to never be found. So they assumed that the fire was so hot that it just disintegrated. Him, Dean Moon, and um, I'm sorry, I can't remember, Chris Heyman. They were all kind of assumed dead. So those are kind of where it kind of like just becomes theories and what happens because like I said, they only have the eyewitness accounts and all of the other evidence sank. So the theory that investigators came up with
Did they say like how
what
it sank?
there was just so much damage from the
Oh,
fire. The shuttlecocks had been opened already, so it just like
Combination of
there was
everything.
yeah, it just sank. The theory is that on September 5th, a man boarded the investor after the Coulthers returned from dinner, and he is most likely he knew the victims um, at some point. He either knew Mark or he knew one of the other guys, or maybe he knew Irene, but he definitely knew the people on board. And at some point, a fight breaks out, and the man had brought on board a 22 caliber weapon. This fight led to the man shooting at least one victim, and then he realized the remaining 7 members on the investor needed to be killed to prevent any witnesses. Because of the loud party on the decking, nothing was heard, And after the killing, the man stayed on board the ship until the following morning, deciding what to do next. That is when they tried to quietly drift into the harbor, not starting the engine to avoid the detection. And they took the boat to Fishing Island, where they attempted to sink the ship, leaving it in the thick fog that had rolled into the area. Which it was kind of a perfect case scenario if you're trying to avoid detection because you have Mother Nature covering up your crime with a blanket of fog. And like from what I can read about the weather at the time and like even now, like the fog that comes in isn't like fog that resides on land. It's so thick. Like you could like people can't travel in the fog because it's so thick and like ships that do, like they can barely see in front of them, so it's not like just like a, "Oh, I can shine a light and see." You can't. Like, it's a blanket. Pretty much like if you covered your eyes, you would have a better chance of seeing. So, the killer then uses the skiff to go back to Craig, where he to his dismay, he finds the ship still afloat the next morning when the fog had lifted. The man then panics and purchases gasoline in a shop in Craig before they return to the investor and set it on fire. It's theorized that he likely left on another fishing boat, perhaps being a part of either another crew or maybe he had an escape plan the whole time. Like they're not for sure really what occurred. Um, so the authorities kind of began to narrow down the suspect pool, and they start with the Washington State area. That's where the ship originally like docks during non-fishing season, and it's really rare that Irene and the kids would be on board, so I'm not for sure if, like, they thought maybe this was just an accident, like, they were on board at this time, but I don't I don't see someone or a decent human just being able to commit such a gruesome crime, like, hiding from it, but that's exactly what they thought. They thought they just went home and to Washington. So they start conducting dozens of interviews, and it's like I said, the fisherman community is huge in this area, especially like the Northwest and like the Alaska area, but they're so tight knit. Like they they're so tight knit that these fishermen raised money to find the man that done this. They raised $15,000 um on their own to help find the murderer and see it solved.
That's crazy.
There
Like
is literally
these people like came together for this family.
yeah, and I mean, it just shook them. Like, everyone loved Mark, and their children were so sweet and, like, doted on by the fishing community. So just for them to have, like, lost that, it was a tragedy, not just to the families, but to the whole community of fishermen in this area. So, a sketch was distributed out to all vessels entering Craig and throughout the Pacific Northwest in hope of finding the vessel the man had left on. They kind of just wanted to pass this out to as many fishing vessels that they could because they know this man was known. Like, he would be seen somewhere, someone in this area knew him because he had to leave on a boat. The only way you can get to Craig, Alaska is if you fly or sail. And like I think they knew that there was no planes that had come in that day, so they know he left on a boat. There were differences in the eyewitness accounts, but they combined the similarities, creating one composite and it was a young white man in his late teens, early 20s. He stood about 5'9" to 6 foot tall, and he was slim to average build. He had long and unkept blonde hair, and he had a scarred complexion and wore rectangular glasses. The mayor actually, this is such a small town that the mayor witnessed the suspect. Like the main guy of Craig seen the guy who done this, and he like remembers that this man was super cool and he was collected and stated there were probably about 500 guys in this town that looked like him. So, of the 600, 500 people matched the description. But then we get to a man named John Pill. John is a former crewman of Mark's, and he worked under Mark on a boat called the Kit, and he never served on the investor, but he lived in the Bellingham, Washington area, and he worked as a shipbuilder. Pill once dated Mark's sister, and Mark fired Pill um, for drugs and alcohol abuse. He was in Craig on the night of the crime, and he was believed to have sold marijuana to a couple of Mark's crews on the evening. Who he sold it to, they're not for sure, but he definitely knew Mark was in the area because people know members of each other's crew, and Mark had four. So he definitely knew that Mark was in the area. He had originally been exonerated by investigators due to eyewitnesses not being able to identify him as the man. But like I said before, he looks like every other fisherman in the area. So, like, how are they gonna? Who wants to sit there and point at someone and be like, "Hey, you killed them," and but you also look like 499 other men in this area.
Like I feel like he had just like the most unrememberable white man face you could have.
Yeah, and like he's average build. He's your average Joe, and they're trying to pick him out of a lineup. Like it's not gonna work. And then so the crazy thing is Peel actually calls into the line to follow the crimes at least twice that we know of for 100%, but there's thought to be more.
I just they always call in or come in. Like every time the suspect has already talked to the police about it and nobody knows.
Yeah. I'm like, why are you following the crime? Like clearly he didn't like Mark. It's very well known that he did not like him. So for him to follow this case it's a little sus. And then they do polygraph tests on Pill. And I'm like not talking one or two, they do multiple. I want to say it was like 4 to 5 polygraph tests on Pill. And of the 4 to 5, he passed 0 of the polygraph tests. So we know how we feel about polygraph tests, but to fail so many, like you got something on your conscience there. Pill goes in front of a grand jury, but all the evidence, like I said, was circumstantial. They have no physical evidence to tie this man to the ship because the ship's at the bottom of the ocean. So he goes in front of the grand jury. The judge dismisses the case without prejudice. Um, he pretty much tells the prosecutor that you have to get some more evidence because we can't charge him, but there's a chance that this circumstantial evidence does kind of point to him, so you can retry him for this. And that's exactly what happens. They do retry him. And that's when his trials start. On the trial of 1986, so 4 years after the murders, Phil Weiner was the defense attorney, and he was outraged at this trial. He he kept saying there was no reliable evidence, and he even takes the case for free. Like he just believes Pill is just absolutely like being slammed, and he thinks why is this man being accused of something like this is going to ruin his life. And then you have the prosecuting attorney who is Mary Ann Henry, and she believed even though the evidence was circumstantial they could win. And this is where the evidence that they have is kind of like damning, if you ask me, but at the same time, like, I'm kinda like, "How did they go to trial with this?" So I'm kind of conflicted on it. Pill was identified as a man seen buying the gasoline in Craig the day before the fire. So he was named to be the man that was on the skiff for the investor who bought the gasoline. Did he start the fire? We don't know, but we know he bought the gasoline on the skiff, and he was on board the investor because he was on their skiff, but we don't know that he started it with his match.
That is
Um,
suspicious. Little suspicious.
yeah, yeah. Um, and he's also identified as the man on the skiff leaving the crime that talks to the casino members when he's passing after the fire has started. So he buys the gasoline. We don't know if he starts the fire, but he's then leaving the fire. But we don't know that he done it. This was the longest trial in Alaska history. It lasted 6 months, and the jury deliberated for 6 days. And they come out deadlocked, 7 to 5, favoring not guilty. So it's a mistrial, and they have to do a second trial. So it's 2 years after the first trial, a second trial begins, and this time the trial is argued with the same evidence, but once again, Pill is acquitted by a hung jury. And there's no like reasonable reason that they keep retrying him because they don't have any new evidence. And even at this point, the memory and recollection of all the witnesses isn't even credible because it's been 6 years since the crime happened. So, Pill actually sues the state of Alaska in 1990 for wrongful prosecution. And you would think, oh, they have so many eyewitnesses that he would actually lose this. But a memo sent by an investigator admitted the case was circumstantial and the crime would not be solved without a confession. All the evidence lays at the bottom of the sea, and Pill actually settles for $900,000, ending a decade of defense for the murders.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And so that's kind of like all of the facts that we have surrounding the case. There are a few rumors I'll just go over because I kind of think they're kind of important because I feel like in such a tight knit community, there's some validation in rumors because it's such a small town. But the attorney and the investigator stated pretty early on that drugs were not involved in this case. However, many people believe the drugs were the reason for the murders. Two crewmen who worked with Peel stated that he actually admitted to committing the murders, and their claims were suspect and thought to not be viable. But I'm like, okay.
Why couldn't we have those men on the
So
witness stand?
I was like, why weren't they on the witness stand? A and B, like, why weren't they viable? I got a couple of different reasons that they weren't viable. One was because they were old crew members, they didn't really like Peel, and that sometimes they would smoke marijuana and stuff. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't know many like marijuana makes your memory foggy, but I think if you come to me, Amy, and I don't care how high or what drugs I was on, and you told me you committed a murder, I'm gonna remember. I'm gonna
Yeah.
remember that. Yeah, but
I might call you the next day to make sure I'm not crazy. I'll be like, "Did you tell me last night that you committed a murder?" Because we need to talk a little bit more about that one, buddy.
Yeah, and I'm like, the same man that's on trial admits to killing these people with all of this evidence pointing to him, and yet they didn't take him. But I don't know. I don't know. And then the craziest thing that I found was the defense also hints that Heyman or Moon could have committed the crime since their remains were actually never identified. Um, but how could they be? Because if they were like a lot of, and there was also like some rumors that say that someone actually kidnapped John from the remains because his body was never found, but the fire burned for so long. It burned almost a full 24 hours. It was hot. It was not put out, and I think that the remains they did find were so badly burned, and then they did find Jerome Keon, and I mean, like, all that was left of his body was a jawbone, like, so I'm like, it's very likely that there were ashes at that point, and there's nothing left of them, so I don't think there's any viability to that
Also,
rumor, but
they would have had to get on somebody else's boat to leave Craig, and somebody would have been like, "Yeah, you don't work here."
right, yeah. So, I don't think there's any viability to that at all, and they're college students, why would they do such a magnitude like a crime of magnitude, especially considering that Heyman and Moon were more like experienced, like people knew them. Like they had been on the boat longer than anyone else, and I think they would have recognized them leaving Craig. So, well, that's all of the facts on this case, and now we can get to our opinions.
Yeah, this case is a sad one. I can see why this one would affect you.
Yeah.
this is a rough one. And I've already given a few of my opinions. Like those men should have for sure been on the witness stand at some point. But also we don't know when they told him that, I guess. So he could have told him that after the trials for all we know.
You're right.
Um, and I don't think the crew members did it. I'm pretty set on that. I don't think the crew members had anything to do with it. Um, they were probably because they went to drink, so they were probably just like passed out drunk. I'm not gonna lie. Okay.
Right. And I'm like, I think there might be some logical explanation as to like, oh, Pill probably got onto that boat. I think 1,000% sure that Pill done it. Like he even if he doesn't know it, like why did he fail multiple polygraphs? Like what does he have to be guilty about? And one of Coulthurst's sister, she actually meets with Pill like after the trials and kind of discusses it with him, which once again, like we talk about some brave people on here, but she was one of the bravest. Like I could not imagine facing my brother's murderer or suspected murderer and talking to them and everything. She states that she doesn't necessarily think that Pill may have done it himself, but he knows information as to who did it and that he just won't give that up. So I think that was the nice way of saying that either he done it or someone else he knows done it. But she just was too nice to say that.
Yeah, I straight up think Peel did it.
Oh yeah. There's just too much information.
Like he seems like a sketchy character in general. But also, can somebody wrongfully accuse me of something and take me to court so I can sue somebody and get $900,000? Please and
I'm
thank
like, the
you.
state of Alaska, like if that's Alaska, you could probably sell to California and get much more.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I think he got away with it. I don't even know how because I'm like, there was so many eyewitness accounts that pointed to Pill, and yet he sued. Like he made money off of these murders that he probably committed. And I'm like, that's the most sickening thing to me.
I would be terrified that it would just turn against me somehow that I did it. Like, yeah, this is a crazy case. I'll give you that. I was like following along with your map and stuff. I was like, dang.
Yeah. I got really involved in this case super early. Like, as soon as I found it, like, it was just one of those cases, like, I hadn't heard of until I started investigating it, and, like, I'm telling you that this one got me. Like, it we talk about a lot of murders, and there's unfortunately children involved in them quite a bit, but this one is a lot, like, those kids, the pregnant wife, like, it's just too much. Too much.
Yeah, I don't even know what to say about this case, and I know that's like probably doesn't sound good that I don't. There's just it's just such a sad case to me.
Yeah. And, like, could you the part that gets me the most and, like, I actually, like, I was like, I couldn't think about it too much at the time, is there's 2 families out there that don't have anything to bury. Like, well, 3 technically if you count John, but there's 3 funerals without any bodies because they just were that badly disintegrated, and then you have Jerome Keon, who was going to college. He started this job just to pay for college, and one of his parents got a call that no parent ever wants to get, and I can't imagine. And then the Coulthurst family, they lost 6 members. 6 because you got the baby too. Like they were so excited about this baby. Like it's their 3rd baby. Like I don't know.
Like every single person in this case was younger than us.
Right.
And that I think that's the part that just like has me almost like speechless is that every single one of them had such a like so much more life to live.
And like technically they were just starting it, like Kimberly was getting ready to start kindergarten and like they had their whole lives ahead of them. They were getting ready to welcome a new baby and someone decided if it was drugs, like nothing that warrants killing someone, but then to kill someone over drugs, like,
It's
it's not
not
worth
worth
it.
it.
I mean, we don't do drugs, but still, I can't imagine there's anything worth killing a child over, especially, or a pregnant woman.
And I have to wonder, like, were they after John and just like the rest of them were just kind of like wrong place, wrong time kind of situation?
Yeah. There's speculation that they just wanted to kidnap John, like, that maybe, um,
Or not
that's
John, the
why.
dad, Mark. Sorry.
Well,
Got my people
yeah, but
confused.
there's speculation that they do wanna kidnap John, like, as a child, and that's why he was never found. But the thing with that is a lot of people say that Mark bought that boat with drug money, that there was drugs on board. But if you look at pictures and you, like, research him, he was all about his family. You can't convince me that he had drugs on board with those 2 small children and his wife. Like, he may have ran drugs, but I don't think he would have been on board that night, and, um, like I said, like, they make very good money off of their fish. Like, they caught 77,000 pounds of fish in 1 week. They made more than some American families make all year. You know, like, it's not like he's in a business that doesn't make money and could afford that boat without doing drugs. Like, I don't think there was drugs involved, and if there was, it was marijuana, like, because they do say that 2 of the members had bought marijuana from John Peel that night, but
Or like, were they
I
after
don't.
Mark to kill Mark and everybody else was just like, well, can't have any witnesses. Gotta kill you all now.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's kind of my opinion is I think I 1,000% believe that it was John Peel. I think he was mad about something. He was vengeful against Mark for firing him. He gets on that board and he didn't realize the family was on board too. Because, like I said, there's a lot of times that the family wasn't normally on board. Like, I think they had just came out for a couple of days and were getting ready to head back. And then the day before this happened. So I think maybe he thought the members either wouldn't be on the board because, I mean, at most, it was 1 guy, maybe 2, but he took on 8 people. Something crazy happened that night, and I'm not really for sure what, and I don't think we'll ever know, but it's very sad.
Yeah, this was a rough case.
Yeah. There are a couple of numbers, like, there's no other suspects besides John Peel that's ever been named, um, but they do still take tips and stuff for their Crime Stoppers, page, and their Crime Stoppers number is actually, it's Anchorage Crime Stoppers, and it's the number, if you have any tips or anything, is going to be 561 stop 7, and that's 561-7867 if you have any tips to help get answers for this family or families.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else, Amy?
I think that's all I really got. It's just this one has me literally like speechless almost.
Yeah, it's so sad. Once again, if you have any tips, you can always contact the Crime Stoppers line for Alaska. You can also reach out to the FBI. They'll take any tips involved. You can reach out to pretty much any crime department in Alaska if you know anything, or Washington. They will relay messages back. And this case is still technically cold. So if we could get answers, that would be wonderful. And I think that ends our show. You can also, if you don't feel comfortable contacting the Crime Stoppers or don't want to reach out, you can always reach out to us. We can get it to whoever needs it. Our email address is bibbidyboppittymurder@gmail.com. You can reach us on TikTok or Facebook, and we also have Instagram, Twitter. We don't use those as much, but we always will get messages and stuff from that. So thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Bye everyone.